This is Conliu, a masterful illustrator that has worked at studios such as Blizzard and more notably Riot Games as an art lead and illustrator, not to mention the hundreds of thousands of followers he has garnered across multiple social media accounts due to his illustrations and animations. But pushing all of that aside, what I'm actually here to break down isn't any of his professional work, but his insanely high detailed effects that he does for his personal pieces. Most notably his water and fire effects, with a big emphasis on his water. I mean, just look at that, it looks like I could drink it off the screen. Now, I don't know if he sells any courses or anything like that, but all I had to really work with was the illustrations that he's posted over the past few years, which to be fair is quite a lot, and this singular speed paint he posted over 3 years ago. So obviously whatever I say in this video is not the be all end all for Conliu's effect style, it's just my interpretation over the past few weeks of studying it. And looking at the results I get later in the video, I think that'll be enough for pretty much 99% of you guys nonetheless. And of course, links to all of Conliu's socials will be in the description, so without further ado, let's get into. Before we draw anything, let's talk about the two brushes I'll be using throughout the majority of this video, that being the soft round brush, hard round brush, and a little bit of blur tool. If you guys want to know what specific soft round brush I'm using, it's the one I sourced in my previous Gouache study video, so linked in the description for that one as well. But other than that, there's no specialized brush that's needed for 95% of this process, barring the end if you want to add some more unique textures to your water and things like that. So, when looking at the way Conliu makes his water, oh, you guys haven't seen how he makes his water? Well, roll the clip. That clip is from a speed paint, which is pretty much the only thing we have to work off of in terms of this process. So what are some things that I noticed? The first and most notable thing about the way he creates his water is how he takes the environment into consideration to an almost extreme degree. Notice how he doesn't even bother to block in shapes, he just creates an outline where he thinks the water should flow and distorts everything within that outline. Now, there's two words in that previous sentence that actually lead into my next and last 2 points. Distort and flow. Starting with flow, everything that Conliu makes has a very distinct and fluid movement to it, almost like that's exactly how real water would act in that situation. I personally have never seen a Conliu piece where the water has an unnatural flow, and that one thing not only makes the effects pleasing to look at, but leads your eyes to a focal point and improves the composition all in one fell swoop. But flow alone is not what will make water look realistic. That I would like to contribute to distortion. Water is clear, but it's not a mirror. Yes, you can see objects behind water, but if you don't distort it correctly or even at all, something will look off. This isn't shown off as well in the speed paint, but looking at other works of his, water distorts in very peculiar ways that differ between environments and water densities, but they all share one key principle. The distortion also follows the water's flow or direction, and with all of that in mind, we can finally get into the part where we actually break down this process and make some water for ourselves. So get your trusty drawing tablet and pen ready, and let's get to this step by step. Step 1, the base. So the first thing we need to create is a base for the water. The color for this base can change a lot depending on the background, whether it's light or dark, but in general you want to keep it around a mid-tone gray with a bit of a bluish tint. Now take this and lightly outline the shape of your water that you want to create, again keeping the flow of the water and piece intact while doing so. And that's it. Pause the video until you get that done, or not, it's your own choice. So next we have step 2, branching out. Now we have a base outline for the water, let's add some depth. Color pick the background behind the water and make it slightly darker, then take the color from the previous step and make it slightly lighter. Now begin adding that darker color in between the outlines of the water, slightly distorting everything behind it. And then add little pops of that lighter color on top in order to actually show the viewer that hey, this is water and not some weird space-time rift thing. Now step 3, lights and darks. So now that we have a full outline of how the water flows, it's time to get to the darkest darks and specular highlights so that we can plot those onto the water. Keep in mind that depending on the environment and lighting scenario, the amount of lights and darks that you need to put in will drastically change. Dark environments with a harsh lighting could require a lot of highlights, while a white background could require little to none at all. Meanwhile, the darkest parts in the dark backgrounds could just be an extra detail, while on the lighter backgrounds could become the most eye-catching part of the water. Now, I can't tell you exactly where to plot the highlights or dark parts of the water every time, because that changes with literally every factor that you can think of. The lighting scenario, environment, what's behind the water, what type of water it is, what's the shape of the water, things like that. So yeah, have fun with that. I'm assuming you get that done, and with that, we've basically finished water. Well, basically. Step 4, rendering and particles, is at this point where I can basically set you guys loose to do whatever you think will make the water look better. Although the water does look quite passable at step 3, it's step 4 and your own rendering skill that will really bring it into the realm of professionalism, as is the case with pretty much everything else in art. But beyond rendering, what's one more thing Conliu does with his water to really bring out the detail? Particles. This man does not mess around with creating particles. No special particle brush, all hand drawn using the same methods put all over the place. If there's water near something, you bet there's going to be at least 30 water particles near it as well. So I suggest, along with all the other previous steps that we've done, to pull up a Conliu piece and follow the way that he places particles around his water and how deliberately random it can get. And so with that, you now know how to draw some of Conliu's water in some environments. What, you thought you could learn realistic water rendering in 6 minutes? I mean, I haven't even mentioned bonus step, objects behind water. So we've done water suspended in the air, but what if there's something behind that water? Say a white pole, for instance. How exactly do we distort it? Well, it's actually surprisingly simple. At this point, I think you should know what direction your water is flowing, so all you have to do is cut out the background object inside that water and shift it in that direction, usually cutting it into a few pieces in the process. And there we have it, Conliu's water and how I break it down. Now there's some bits and pieces that I didn't touch on, such as what parts of the water to blur or how much blue you should actually add to the water, but that's because those parts are highly subjective to the type of water or composition you're making and doesn't make or break the water too much. If you want it out of focus, then blur it. If you want to add more pop into an otherwise desaturated piece, then bring up the saturation in some parts of the water. And if you're at the point where you can do all of those other 4 steps and bonus step and everything else I've added on top of that flawlessly, and you still have questions, then I think you're at the point where you can figure it out without a YouTube video. Unlike water, fire in general is a lot more structured, as painterly as it looks, so I think it'll be a lot more straightforward to teach. Although, in all honesty, I don't even have a speed paint to work off of for this part, so this will probably be more representative of my own style rather than Conliu's style, but that's why I left this part in the second half of the video. Disclaimers aside, let's take a look at how Conliu uses fire in his illustrations. Looking closely at a few of these paintings, you actually see a lot of variety in the way he makes his fire, sometimes ranging between fully opaque typical orange fire to sometimes adding pops of blues and cyans to sometimes making it almost kind of like a smoke. But in general, you can see a lot of similarities to the way he also makes his water. Conliu's fire flows in a similar way that water would, but in the direction and cadence a lot like smoke, which makes sense if you think about it in the way where fire is carried away by the wind in a similar fashion as smoke, but still maintains a bit of a physical form like water. Another thing to notice is that the particle effects are just as prominent here as they were with water, which really demonstrates how much he thinks particles can help composition if he's using them with pretty much all of his pieces. And lastly, I think I mentioned this a bit before, but he uses blur and blending tools a lot more with fire than he does with water. But even with all of this in mind, the method to create fire is exactly what you think it is. No crazy fire formula or confusing concepts to wrap your head around, just pure technical skill. In fact, I think I could simplify it into just 3. Step 1, the base. Take a base color, most likely an orange, but this method should technically work for fire in any color. Anyways, now that you have your color, good. Now just block and fire in whatever shape you want, keeping in mind how the movements of your character or environment will affect the wind around the fire. Step 2, render. Now it's time to give detail to the fire. From the furthest edge to the point of ignition, make the fire lighter and lighter until it's near white. But there's some things to keep in mind with the colors. I found that if you color pick and blend too much at the very beginning, the fire will look too muddy without too much distinction between the points where the fire gets hotter, unlike Conliu's fire that has clear breaking points. So typically I like to limit my color choices, using only 2 colors lighter than the base and 2 colors darker if needed. That way you can really separate the lighter and hotter segments of the fire from the base, and once that's done, you can start picking some colors in between and blending everything together. This is the part where I imagine most people will get stuck not knowing exactly which part you should actually blend into what color. How do I know whether this part of the fire should be darker or lighter than this other part? Well, sadly, the only thing I have to say about that is experience and reference. This is where skill and technical ability come into play the most. If you've drawn and studied fire a whole lot, this part will be way easier. If not, then you might have to find a few dozen fire references. Assuming that all goes well, there we go. You now have some rendered out fire. Step 3, effects and blur. Now you can add all of those particle effects that I was mentioning earlier using all the colors in your fire, and at the same time blurring the edges of certain certain parts of the fire and particles as they blow away in the wind. And voila, a full 3, but probably more than 3, probably about 6-step process on how to create fire in the style of Con Liu. I know, disappointing that there's no secret fire brush or technique that you can use, but it's also a bit reassuring that there's no secret when it comes to making things like this. It all just comes down to pure skill and color sense. So now you know how to somewhat replicate Con Liu's fire in water. Of course, we'll never get it to the perfect accuracy that Con Liu does, but that's just fine because I don't know about you, but I don't desire to just be a Con Liu clone. I want to use this technique as a base in order to improve my own artwork and style. So in that mentality, I took some extra time to actually create 2 pieces with the effects that we just worked with, so why don't we take a look at them? To save everyone some time, I'm just going to skip straight to the part where I do the water effects. If you want to see how I render up to this part, most of this was done on stream on this channel. Yes, that's right, I'm streaming now every week, so come and check it out. I'll probably do another one in a day or 2 after this video is posted. Anyways, right now we have a clear composition and the base of the water is already laid out in pink. So all we have to do and all that you're seeing is change the color from pink to something more grayish blue and follow the same steps from earlier. As you guys can see from the time lapse, I do tend to flip-flop between steps 2 and 3 as I don't see it as much of an order I have to follow rather than a checklist of things that I have to add. Other than that, I do tend to spend quite a bit of time restructuring my initial base as it doesn't quite flow in the directions that I wanted it to, but once that was all figured out, it was just a matter of painting over some things and we're done. And again, for the sake of time, let's just skip to the end of this piece and there we go. Overall, I think there's a lot of things done right here and I think it's quite a good start considering I've only been studying this style of water for about 3 weeks or so. One thing to point out though is that a lot of this water is actually transparent, even to the point where I can change the background to white, and even though there's still quite a lot of blue left over, frankly from being too lazy to use an eraser, it still reads just as well, if not a little bit better. And this leads into another point where I actually think this makes for a good benchmark. If you're able to change your background and your effects still look good, if not even a little bit more interesting than the original background, then I think you're on the right track. Now, in terms of the illustration for fire, I just so happened to completely coincidentally create a fire illustration right before preparing for this video. And since this just so happened to be there and I'm totally not being lazy and don't want to make all the piece just for this bit, I might as well just draw over the fire and there we go. Honestly, there isn't much to say about this. Just like the water, I went step by step creating the base, leaving the base and rendering out the rest of the character, and then finally rendering out the fire and adding another background as a cherry on top. Another thing to point out though is that the fire also affects the character, as obviously as the character in armor gets more near it, it should start to glow in that orange hue. So overall, I personally have found this study to be extremely successful, especially in the portions where I studied water. I feel this has really leveled up the amount of awareness that I have when creating to keep in mind the environment when I paint. And I hope this video has helped quite a lot of you guys, as I know it's a struggle to paint things not as traditional like fire or water, or if not, at least you enjoyed watching a bit of a breakdown of another artist's style that I greatly respect. If you guys want more content of me breaking down other artists like this, please do leave a like, as it tells me which videos you guys want or don't. We also just reached 30k subs, which is a big deal, so thank you to everyone that watches and supports me. Don't forget to check out the streams, and with all of that out of the way, I'll catch y'all in the next one.